Everybody wants to either be a PJ or they want to be a pilot. That's the first thing usually people will throw at you. And I'm just gonna say this just as me, but I could tell usually early on if that's actually going to happen or not, right? Because a lot of times if someone says I want to be a pilot, how can you help me get there? Sure, we can talk all day, but are you actually going to execute is the real question.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we have an amazing interview ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days, like today, we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space. Other days, we cover trending topics, items that recruiters are talking about or will be very soon, and what those mean for them. Stop by every Tuesday for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Every once in a while, we open it up for Q&A. Listeners can drop in questions that they'd like to hear us take on, so send those to us at podcast@loxo.co. And occasionally you'll hear a mic drop episode from Matt where he joins to share something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. All right, today's interview. So over the years, I've noticed some similarities between top performers within organizations, and those happen regardless of industry, organization size, any other number of factors. And these similarities aren't typically the skills that you would see on a resume, but often they're a result of the experiences that those candidates themselves went through. One of the groups that I've seen this in time and again is veterans. And today we have a special guest joining us, Brandon Charleston, a veteran himself and owner of Tech Recruiter Pro. So aside from his experience serving in the military as a recruiter, he also helps veterans transition into civilian roles. So from discussing unique experiences and skills that veterans possess to what veterans should know before they transition, to what recruiters can do to help hiring managers better understand the unique skills and abilities of veterans, this is one episode you will not want to skip. So on that note, let's get into it with the conversation with Brandon. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Much appreciated, and always happy to be a guest, and do what I can to help. So
I love it. Yeah, this one, I've been looking forward to it for a few weeks now. So you have a very interesting background. Just you've recruited in a number of different facets. So you were a recruiter for the Air Force, and then you moved over to recruiting within technology space, and then you even got into some executive search specifically. So I mean, you've seen just about every gamut of it. So I guess walk us through a little bit, just your journey, how you got into recruiting is just in general, and then what it was like in each of those different steps of your career.
absolutely. So, there's always the big question of how nobody really says I want to be a recruiter when I grow up, right? That's like the golden question that we all get. I guess a soft, I guess, segue into that is I was kind of born into that. We didn't talk about this previously, but my dad was a career recruiter in the Air Force at that, and he also did the staffing and all that with the healthcare industry specifically. So I guess it's kind of always been in the house. And then, the big question is when you're young, my dad's like, okay, well, you're an adult now. You either got to go to school, pay rent, or, join the service, figure out what you're going to do, right? Because it's not free all the time. And so, tried out a few things, with college, like you all do, you get a job. And, so for me, joining the service, the Air Force made sense. Still serving today. I did 15 years active duty. Now I'm in the Air National Guard in Utah. I hit 20 years just this past June in 2023. So looking to retire here soon, but it's not. It needs to be clear because obviously it's a big decision, right? So yeah, full time. I basically do recruiting, executive recruiting. I love it. I'm a go getter kind of person, always have been, and so love it. So I guess that's kind of how I fell into recruiting. And so after my first chapter in the service, I was working on jet engines and all things aircraft. I was stationed in Edwards, Langley, and mostly, touched everything about aircrafts. And so I was a jet engine mechanic. And then I talked to my dad. He said, well, you can try recruiting. You always persuade people to do things you want to do. And so I said, why not? So I volunteered and I recruited in Reno, Nevada, which is kind of my stomping grounds as a kid, Reno, Tahoe area. Loved it, ran my own show, was a top recruiter out there, and then did officer recruiting for both healthcare and tech roles. So that was kind of my segue into tech, even though I did all things tech growing up. Um, and so just loved every bit of that. And then the Air Force said, hey, you know what? You remember that flight line job you had? We need you back. And so I was like, okay, well, so I did that. Got the entrepreneur bug, launched a Kickstarter back in 2017. And with COVID and supply chain, there's a lot of challenges with that. So it didn't make sense to pursue that any further. So I just fell back into the recruiting. And then I went to the other side of civilian or the private sector, we call it, right? I did talent acquisition for a small government contracting company and led that talent acquisition department with stakeholders and what have you, seeing the inside of the corporate and government setting. But I was working with a lot of veterans now on the opposite, where they were retiring, separating, etc. And so I found a lot of gaps because a lot of times I'll get a resume where they're applying for a job and I see something like we call them their bullets, which is kind of like how they save the world, big things that they do inside the service through a lot of different annual reviews. And so a lot of times that doesn't directly speak to the actual job that they're applying for. And so I would coach them, kind of help them understand their true skills and experience, and then relate that to the hiring manager or whoever their boss is going to be in order to get them the job, right? Because that's my job, is to get people jobs, right? And so I loved it. You're making big big impacts in people's lives, right? And you're helping businesses grow, so everybody wins. So yeah, I guess in 2020, that's when they said, hey, we don't have any more jobs for you, unfortunately we're going to have to let you go. So in 2020 I leveraged my network and just really started doing my own biz dev, helping people. And that's when I stood up my own agency and just continued on. And then like a fire hose, 2021, 2022, etc., is like a fire hose of experience. And so I just really got immersed, and I've always been in tech. And so it's kind of come natural to me just to really be involved with various tech stacks and understanding what different organizations used. And so I was able to help, big companies, Fortune 100 and startups, all the way through, just helping them wherever they're at and making sure they effectively hire. So that's kind of where I'm at today. So long
I
story
love it.
short, you fall into recruiting, here I am today. So
I love it. And there's so many rabbit holes that we are absolutely going to go down with this conversation. And so the first one, because you kind of led into it a little bit, is this is, I'll call it like an opinion that I've noticed myself, but I definitely want to get your thought on it. Is you have this, there's always these articles, BuzzFeed articles, Forbes articles, whatever, like hire for the intangibles. And it's like, well, what are the intangibles? It's like, that's why they're intangible. It's like, well,
hmm
it's kind of chasing my tail right now. So I've noticed a trend, and this is where I'm really curious to see your thoughts on it, around competitive athletes, whether that's college athletes, high level athletes, just people who perform at that level, and veterans. And what I've noticed within this is it distills down to some of these skills, like the ability to work as a team towards a shared goal, grit. You even touched on this with your dad. I call it figure it out ability. Basically, things aren't free, figure it out. So the ability to just say like, well, no one's going to do this for me, I've got to do it myself. I've noticed in these two groups that they have a lot of these types of intangibles that make them phenomenal team members. And again, they don't always have the best resumes, so it's hard to pull those out unless you know how to like distill it out from their experiences, because it's not going to show up as a skill set. Anyone can put, I'm a great team player, but you and I both know how that goes when you toss that on a resume.
hmm
So with that, I love that you've kind of got that in your story, because you've been chugging along the entire time. Like you said, 2020, well, I guess I'll go start my own thing. I've got to figure it out. Here's my skill set. Let's make it work. So with that side of things, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you have either applied that for yourself, or like how you also help military members transition into civilian life. Like, what are some of those things that you see that sets them apart? I mean, you touched on like the bullets and the annual reviews. I'd love to hear a little bit more on that side of it.
Yeah, so like we all can agree, recruiting is in the people business, right? We're all people. We all have very unique skill sets and experiences that we can deliver, right? A lot of that stuff doesn't go on paper. And if it's on paper, it sounds like fluff, right? Because usually the hiring manager just wants to match what they actually need. If you call that a job description, it's usually not the case. But it's usually the connection, right? People like to work with people who they like, understand, and trust, right? And so that's really comes down to that. And the number one thing that I found was a good strike is people like to work with people who you build rapport with as well, because that builds trust. And so the commonality that I think, from my perspective, that you're asking is, when it comes to athletes and veterans, is they have the loyalty, they have the tenacity, they have the drive, and the resilience to not quit. And so, even, in the dark, dark days when you just don't even want to wake up or not do anything, you still have to have a fire under your tail, right? To know that you're going to succeed. And a lot of times it does take 100 or 1,000 no's to get the one yes, but that's thick skin, right? And so with athletes and veterans, we are, well, you have a coach as an athlete, right? Depending on what level you're at, the brutalness probably gets a little bit higher, right? You would think in college and, maybe NFL stuff, like, there's always the soft aspect, but you gotta have thick skin. Same with the service. The service, you show up to work. If you got a cough, nope, get your ass to work, right? Pardon my language, but it's just the reality of it. And so when it comes to veterans, speaking on behalf of veterans, that is kind of a natural thing that we've proven ourselves through, because if you make it through whatever boot camp you went through, some branches are soft. That's a whole nother conversation. And then there's, of course, Marine Corps. Those are my other brothers. But you go through some sort of training where you got to make the cut, right? And if you serve either just 4 or 6 years or even 20 plus years, you have the drive and the knowledge, and the soft skills, like you said, the intangibles, but relating those to what your objective is, whether it's getting a client or starting your own business, or even just getting a job. It's the figuring out part. And so that's a really difficult thing to kind of answer in one question. But I think the big thing here is finding somebody who can mentor you, having a coach. And then a lot of times for us as recruiters, especially in the executive space, we are coaches, we're consultants. And so having a breadth of industry experience from all different perspectives can, in my opinion, really help out athletes and veterans, to be able to maybe spark a new idea. Because you might be talking, for example, to somebody who served in the army for 20 years. They worked at McDonald's or Taco Bell, and that's all they know. They join when they're 18. Now they're, 40 plus, have 2 kids, and they retired from the service. And that's all they did is know how to shoot a rifle and manage and bark at people, right? Well, that doesn't directly relate to really a whole lot in the private sector. And so being able to either prepare better or at least know what they should know or what they should go towards to actually make that relatable to the private sector, right? And if they don't have that, well, they at least have a start, or we can translate certain areas or guide them to an industry that might be relevant. Or it could be a complete refresh where they want to start their own business, just knowing kind of what podcast to listen to, or look at University of YouTube, right? Eventually, we're going to get a degree from YouTube, I'm sure. But just being able to know, like, start an LLC, start shaking hands with people. Use, to me, it can't be any easier, going on LinkedIn and connecting with people. And so, but the common thing here is you got to develop the thick skin. You can't have soft skin and in this kind of thing. So, the Godfather says, take it to the mattresses. Well, it's still tried and true, even here we are 2023, so you got to take it to the mattresses.
I love it. So those are some great points. And the how you were talking about you have to have someone that can mentor you, can coach you. So as a recruiter, when you're working with these individuals, how are you helping to position them to hiring managers, organizations where they would be a good fit for? But again, like if you look at their resume or the skills, it's not going to match. Like how do you help them align those?
Hmm. Yeah, so that's a great point. I have seen so many times, still continue to see it, where I have a veteran, or a colleague that I worked with indirectly or directly. They'll reach out to me, and I know what's behind it. I know what they've experienced, and I can relate to that. But if they're saying, hey, I retire, or this is my next chapter coming up, this is what I want to do. I basically say, hey, well, start off with a master resume. Just put everything on there. Right now, you don't even need to organize it because a GPT can organize that, right? Claude or Bard. So I'm like, just spill the beans, bring up a Word document, put everything on there, even your Wendy's and your Taco Bell first job. just throw that on there, right? It doesn't mean you're going to submit that to a hiring manager, but just do a mouth, just throw up on the mouth on, not literally, but on a Word document to put it on paper for you to visually see it, And I said it might take you, depending on how old you are and how many jobs you've had, might take you a while, but develop it.
Hmm.
And then this is your master resume. This is a master that you do not send to any hiring manager because it needs to tailor, right? And so, and then I kind of just consult them like, all right, put it in groups. What's a tier one? What is a throwaway job? What is a career job? Um, what are some common key words? Because it's all semantics at the end of the day. A program manager is not all program management. It's a lot of different types, right? Just having them kind of understand, but also if they have an interest in a particular job, what is the language of that job? Okay, what are matching keywords? And then not only
Hmm.
that, but knowing the technical aspect, match the keywords. And oh, by the way, what is their ATS? If it's a lever, or like most of them, a Taleo or a Workday, don't send them a PDF. Send them a Word doc, because that technical aspect, it's going to parse properly for whoever the talent acquisition person is. You don't know who they are, to be able to understand and read that resume, right? Because a lot of times we're just going reject, reject, reject. I mean, you got like maybe 3 seconds before you move on. And if they see a bunch of mumbo jumbo that they don't have any clue on of managing an F-16 or a tank, squadron or fleet, they're not gonna they're not gonna resonate with that. And so you just gotta. It's just like sales. You got to sell yourself. So I guess to answer your question, it's going. I'd say peel back the onion, go like 2 or 3 layers deep to find out what the true skill is and how you can meet that. And, sometimes you can't, but that means you can't work towards it, right?
Hmm.
So
So you don't have to use names, but would be curious, like, tell me if like a story or two about individuals that you've helped place and how you translated like the skills that they had during their active duty time, and then how you helped them translate that to the specific role that they ended up in.
yeah, that's a great question. I recall a guy that I worked with. He was an aircraft mechanic in the Air Force, did a career. He did about, I think it was 25 years or so. He was a senior NCO, and he applied for the role. And so one of the roles that I had, it was a technical program manager, right? And that could obviously go in a million different ways. But they're looking for a program manager who can speak the tech, not necessarily code, but understand where to go, right? You have a cross collaboration team of different types, all sorts of engineering, mostly software development. But how are you going to relate aircraft maintenance to that, right? And so I had to dive deeper and say, okay, have you ever coded before? Have you ever even understood how the software development lifecycle works? Do you know what Agile is or Scrum, right? And we touch on that a little bit in the service, through like if you pursue like a PMP, for example. But you got to go a few layers deep. You can't just say line item, I have my PMP or Scrum, right?
Hmm.
So I helped him kind of tailor that. And then I also had him go on YouTube and I sent him a bunch. And we worked through it for probably about 4 months before we actually got him a job. And it was through a little agency. It was a marketing agency, but he was able to understand now, okay, we already know you could lead people. That's a good soft skill, but now you need to speak the language and be able to apply it, right? And so being able to point in the right direction. And as an agile management, you want to be able to do the start all the way through the finish, and then you scale from there, right? And then not only that, but understanding the value they bring, right? Because for us in the service, our pay is usually broken down by several factors, and that doesn't always translate to total comp in the private sector. So I always have them do their own due diligence to make sure they're getting the value they bring as well. And so there's that aspect. And so, and then a lot of times they're pretty alarmed, awakened to be like, wow, like I can't even imagine making 100 grand or, more than that, especially with that skill set. And so, a lot of them will get out as an E7 or below, as an average. And, it's like, whoa, I can make that. And I'm like, yeah, if you apply it, is
Yep.
if you apply it, you'll get it. And so yeah, that was a big one. And so that was a proud moment for sure.
I love it. Yeah, and that's where it goes beyond because you see it now. It's like LinkedIn Easy Apply. Everyone takes that master resume, one click apply. It's not tailored to the job. They're not translating the skills, experiences that they have. But the ability to go through that and really show, I think that's something that like so many of us were taught 10, 20 years ago, like do this for every job because you had to print out the resume, go mail it in or take it to the office. And of course you wanted to show the best one. That now it's coming back full circle on that, but the ability to translate it that level deeper because it's a completely different industry and skill set, you have to do that if you really want to be seen as a top candidate for the position.
Hmm. Absolutely. And leveraging, you'd be really surprised. I don't know the percentage to date, but there's still a very small percentage of people that actually know what AI or ChatGPT is, let alone a Bard or a Claude. They
Hmm.
don't even understand prompt engineering from a very basic level. Everybody knows an Alexa or Google or Siri, right? And so hopefully it goes off. But I got all the ladies right here. So it's available, right? This is a tool that is free and available. So the more they can utilize and leverage that kind of tech, they're going to be at an advantage for sure.
Yeah, speeds things up. All right, so we went deep there. I want to zoom out and focus a little bit more on your organization, Tech Recruiter Pro. So, you all service the full range of what I'll call company maturity. You work with the small VCs, seed funded startups, all the way through Fortune 100 corporations. So, one thing that I've been digging into lately is how an external recruiter can best partner with organizations of such varying sizes. So, I'm sure that like how you work with a seed funded startup is very different from how you'd work with a Fortune 100 corporation. So, I want to hear a little bit more about some of the differences that you see from your perspective and then how you're able to uniquely add value within each of those scenarios.
That's a great question. Yes, and you'd be very right. The conversations are very different. So I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I think the common thing here is relationships. It's all about people you know and trust and like, right? No matter how big the organization is. All I guess the dividing factor is how much red tape you have to cut through, right? So yeah, I've worked with very, very small, seed funded startups, VC backed, where they don't even have an ATS, right? And so to me, um, working with a startup, there's a lot more consultation that has to be had because the team could be literally maybe a team of five, all college kids, and
Hmm.
they don't know the first thing. They have a bunch of money, and now they have all these goals that they don't know what they're going to do when they figure it out. And there's obviously a lot of noise in the recruiting industry, but that's where relationships come into play and providing value that's recognizable to them. And so there's a lot more consultation and strategy, in my opinion, when it comes to the smaller organizations. And it's being able to just kind of roadmap that to know how they're going to scale because that's the
Hmm.
number one goal. And so for me, having had my own startup back, as a product, it was a Kickstarter, but a lot of the formalities are still there. When it comes to starting a business, the LLC, the recruiting, and helping them with the recruiting part to know that they have to, not only set aside a salary, but obviously we need to get paid too, but also utilizing that capital effectively and not just, because that's how you go out of business. Obviously the stakes are against them, or the odds are against them, and so it's having them play the long game, right? And really hiring carefully a founding team to know that they're going to be able to fire on all cylinders in a very short amount of time because there's not a lot of room for error. And so that's where the consultation comes in.
That's an interesting one. Hearing you say that, it solidifies some of the things that I've been seeing within the sector because um, a lot of startups, when they're VC backed, the traditional runway of a funding round gets you about 18 months or so. With the economy now, they're stretching that into about 24. But when you think about, especially an early stage one, you're hiring senior leaders that should be growing. So the ramp time on them alone is going to be about 6 months. You cannot afford to make a bad hire. So that's where you always have that debate of the board saying, we need a VP of sales right now. We need a head of marketing, all of these. So you're thinking, I have to rush to make the hire. The first person who's decently good will put in, but that's where the backside of it is you can't afford because what happens if you onboard them? They're here for 6 months. They're a flop. You've just burned 6 months. You only have 12 months left of your runway and you've got to go start from the beginning again. So how have you seen that play out a lot and how are you helping them find like that balance between getting someone in there quickly because they only have so much time, but not being able to afford to make an improper hire for it?
Yep. And the thing I see as a trend is a lot of times they'll hire people they can't fire, like their friends,
Hmm.
or they'll hire people that don't have the hard skills that is needed. in order to effectively perform the job. You need to have yins and yangs to your organization, to supplement each other, not have common skills. If you like them because they're a lot like you, they're probably not a fit actually. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You want something where they are speaking so much of not your language, like say in marketing, for example, or sales. A lot of times they need growth in marketing and sales to get more customers. And not only that, but on the back end, if you don't speak software, that's a good thing. Maybe they're a fit. But it's also being able to rely, on your higher execs and your VC, whoever backed you, consult with them to understand. Hey, all right, is this you got to be in a mastermind group of some sort to be able to understand at least the surface level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, those are the things that could be controlled and at least mitigate risk, right?
Yeah.
Making a bad hire. Because a lot of times they'll just hire, oh, we'll just hire Joe or we'll just hire whatever, but maybe he doesn't fit the bill. And then now you soured a potentially long term relationship or a friendship that you had because now you're left on bad terms, right? And so don't hire people you can't fire. That's all I have to say about
I
that.
love that. That's such a good way of putting it. All right, so now let's flip over to the other end of the spectrum, the Fortune 100 companies. So with the seed, you're doing a lot of consulting and strategizing. I have a feeling it's a little bit different over on this side.
It is, and again, people. So I worked in corporate. I was also worked part of RPO contracts, and so seeing that side of it, it's kind of to me, RPO is like you're almost on the dark side because you're an executive recruiter with all the tools, and you're working on the inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're running circles around typical TA corporate, and so I've been able to see that, and then just leveraging relationships again, so cutting through the red tape, and establishing those relationships with stakeholders, especially in the upper TA, maybe the people ops or maybe the director of TA, and just knowing that you are a good vendor to work with, right? Because a lot of times when you're that big, they have a vendor list and they vet those out. Even down to the government contracting space, usually you have to do an RFP or submit a proposal, and then it's all value based, right? So being able again, it all falls down to people who they like, know and trust. And so if you're good at the people business, then you have an advantage already, right? And then being able to deliver. So really it's all things recruiting, nurturing the relationship, know, like, and trust. It's just a lot more red tape, but speaking that language to know like there is some red tape that you have to cut through
Mm-hmm.
to be competitive, but also know that you can deliver consistently. To me, that's the big organization, and a lot of times they have processes and SOPs in place where you may have to go through a platform like Bounty or something like that. Well, sometimes you can make it through that platform, because a lot of times they just throw it to the wolves, as I like to call it, and then you have anybody and everybody that can have a bite at it. But to me, a true relationship is if they do have to use Bounty, but they actually only invite you or maybe a very short list of vendors, and they allow you the opportunity to really work on that role. And to me, those are the ones you get after for sure
Mm-hmm.
because they're trusting you, right?
Yeah. And so once you're inside, that you've got the job with them, they trust you. One thing I've seen is it's like you either have a TA team that is focused on the entire company, so they don't necessarily know how to best equip the exec search side and helping at that level, or they have a very, very, very specific exec search function within the company that sits within their TA function, but there's only a few of them, so they can only focus really on like the C-suite hires, some succession planning, and they're not able to get down to the VP level, the director level, where they want to scale and develop. So what types of things are you whether it's RPO offers or something, how are you providing different services with them once you are within the organization, trusted, and helping them expand and really do what you do best?
Yeah, so that's that's a really unique because it just depends on the organization. You have to know, in my opinion, you got to be really in the know for what their goals are, how big they are, what kind of acquisitions, if any, have they had, because that directly ties into right into us and hiring things like that. But just knowing, I think it comes down to just knowing who your client is deep, not just the job description and leveraging relationships, but you have to know their roadmap. And even it's just not necessarily public news or Google, but just being, abreast of who your stakeholders are and saying, oh, I noticed this, or I noticed you looking at their careers page. I noticed you have this, because a lot of bigger organizations actually have subsidiaries that you may or may not know about, and it could be a new acquisition to another startup, because that's all businesses do, right? They either go public or they acquire, right? It's get acquired, I should say. And so just playing that game, there's always going to be things shifting, but you have to just constantly just be abreast of their careers page, know what the roadmap looks like, and just always do a temperature check. And then you can provide value, right? There's a lot of different ways for us as recruiters, be it executive search, contingency, RPO, even short term, just projects, right? As a more of an on demand model versus
Hmm.
RPO. So that's how I would respond to that. Just kind of having, or retained, I should say. That's a whole different game. But yeah, it's just kind of knowing what the best value is to your client, and again, people. It's just people.
Yeah. Okay. That's so interesting. And like you said earlier, it's understanding how can you be the yin to the yang. Often they don't know what they don't know, and that's what you're there for, is to inject your knowledge, your experience, things that they should be thinking about that they wasn't even on their list because they didn't know to be thinking about it.
Yep.
Okay.
You don't know what you
So
don't know. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So let's start to round this out between everything that we've talked about. Like, I'm sure that you've picked up a number of learnings along the way of just where you've worked, how you've worked, who you've worked with, a couple things that you and I were chatting about before that I definitely want to get into, but want to get some of your other insights. One of the first ones you shared that I loved is when you were a recruiter with the Air Force, you discussed how you can let people basically say, like, we can have a no BS conversation. Like, how, I guess, how did you do that there? What did you learn from it? What have you taken from it and been able to apply today?
from being within the Air Force.
Yeah, and just the, like, how you said that, if people were coming in looking to join, you would just say, like, we can have a no BS conversation back and forth. Like, let's talk about how it really is and do that.
Yeah, I remember my mentor when I first came into recruiting for the Air Force. You're actually in the office, like everybody goes to the recruiting office, right? And a lot of times, especially in the Air Force, everybody wants to either be a PJ or they want to be a pilot. That's the first thing usually people will throw at you. Um, and I'm just gonna say this just as me, but I could tell usually early on if that's actually gonna happen or not, right? Because a lot of times if someone says I want to be a pilot, how can you help me get there? Sure, we can talk all day, but are you actually going to execute is the real question, right? And then the person that comes to me that not only doesn't ask me or tell me they want to be a pilot, they say, this is how I'm going to be a pilot. Hey, I'm here to learn more about your pilot program. This is what I've done. This is how I'm doing this. And to me, I'm like, oh, you're going to be a pilot, right? Or a PJ, for example, pararescue, spec ops, all the things. There's obviously a huge washout and demand for that. We're always recruiting for spec ops, but now it's okay. When's the last time? How fast is your swim? How fast do you run a mile and a half? How many pull-ups can you do? All right, let's go. Let's go to the field and let's see how you do. Right? Can you even swim in the first place? Right? Depending on the specialty. So I guess to answer your question, the no BS. A lot of it is it's less sales or less talking, but letting them spill the beans on their history, what their goals are, just having no fluff, conversation, because sometimes it may not pan out. There's sometimes, there's a screening process. So they could be the best candidate in the world, but with the military, they can go through MEPS and they may not even be qualified. So you gotta be frank, right? So I think those things need to get knocked out. But to get to tailor it today, just get the vitals out the door, right? Hey, I want to be valuable of your time and my time. Let's get the hard knockout questions out. This is what we're looking at, high level, and then just get right into the meat and potatoes for them, and then see if there's a match. Right? It's no different in the service. It's no different in the private sector. Just start high level, get the vitals out, and then get in the meat and potatoes. So
So I've seen this a lot in recent years. We're hiring at a stealth company for a role in marketing. Like, let's talk. It's like, well, what company? Because one, that's heavily going to influence if I do or don't want to work for that company and the leadership within it too. What seniority role are we talking? Are we talking, like, first marketing hire, senior marketing hire, entry level marketing hire? And three, how much are you going to pay me at the end of the day? Because I'm happy in my job. I'm not applying to this. You're passively reaching out to me. So, are those some things that you're getting ahead of with those conversations?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's also as recruiters, not necessarily poking the bear, but kind of pushing, the hiring manager because you may be looking for, say, a marketing analyst level, or it could be a senior, right, level. But then you actually come across in your search for a more senior person that's looking to more move up as a director or a manager of some sort. Sometimes the hiring manager might entertain that as well. So even though the person you're talking to is overqualified, you can always approach it and say, hey, you may need to go up or a step down, and let's push the budget, or let's take it a step down and hire two. I don't know. That to me is really understanding, again, your client's needs and where you can kind of form your candidate to make it valuable for them too, whatever that next path is.
And
So
that's where
it's not being rigid, but also being creative and knowing like, okay, a step up or step down, see what kind of flexibility. I have had a lot of scenarios like that. Be like, hey, it's a director level. Can we open up a VP? It's not just a job title, right? It could be,
exactly.
but to make sense to them, why would you want to do a lateral move, right? Like you're happy with your job.
Hmm.
All right, how about VP? Does that sound better? Right? So
Yeah, yeah. It's as you said, not being so rigid. It's don't hold the job description so literally. The job title. It's take it up a little bit level and just say like, what are the jobs to be done? And then within there, usually you do have a little bit of a range of like the job titles that could do it, the comp that would come with it. Because at the end of the day, especially with passive candidates, they're not looking to laterally move. They want their next opportunity, especially if you want the top talent, they are constantly seeking growth, not, oh, well, I don't love it here, but I'll go take the same exact role over there just because I'm bored. It's like maybe you'll get lucky a few times, but that's not super compelling at the end of the day.
the offer, I mean, and in the service, more people than not are not interested or not qualified, but the very small percentage that are qualified and could be interested are not usually looking to join the service. It's not the first conversation. Usually it's a conversation when you're about to graduate high school or maybe college, right, as an officer. But mid-career or growing up, it's usually not a conversation or of interest, right? And so for us as military recruiters, we hot knock or we cold call. Hey, I saw you took the ASVAB. Have you considered joining the service? It's usually a no, but again, it's making an offer, compelling benefits, that could contribute towards their goals, and that's no different in the private sector.
Hmm. Okay, so that's a big learning. Any others that you came across that have just stuck with you over the years and you've applied as you grow in your agency?
I guess as a takeaway, the big thing I would say, because it's an ongoing trend. That I see with a lot of veterans and even just athletes too. But recruiters, there's a lot of executive recruiters like myself. Find an executive recruiter because we're oftentimes also consultants, and we can help give you a fire hose of information that maybe you haven't thought of before. It's not always the corporate recruiter that could guide you to a path that you haven't considered before. And so, there's a lot of things that are given to us as recruiters when we do separate, or not recruiters, excuse me, veterans, such as TAPS, VA benefits, the GI Bill. Those are all kind of things that are just really in our heads all the time. But there's that unknown aspect, which is find yourself a mentor, a recruiter at that, executive recruiter, and then also build yourself a master resume, and then just throw it all out there, and then talk to somebody, and try to be proactive in that approach versus reactive of what am I going to do with my life, right? No
Hmm.
matter where you're at. So I guess hopefully that's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Um,
And if I know a lot of times people might think, especially if they're transitioning out, like, I don't have the money for a headhunter to place me. How should they be reaching out to you or to another executive recruiter? Because it sounds like, sometimes they just want a mentor or they can help you and you don't have to be worried about that side. So, how should they approach someone like you when they're in that position?
Send an email. I mean, we're in the people business. Just because money doesn't always have to be involved, although we got to keep food on the table somehow. But there's a bigger cause, right? That doesn't mean that it has to be an investment or some sort of transaction in the now. But things can happen, things just fall into place sometimes. What's to say any recruiter out there isn't familiar or isn't sure what to do when they guide a veteran towards their next opportunity, and then you place somebody, even for free at that, just to help them get their new job, that may not even be a client of yours. Maybe they found a job on their own, and as because you helped them, or you had, say, a 20 or 30-minute conversation to lead them to that job, guess what? They might be calling you as you have yourself a new client.
Hmm.
So it could come back, you know?
Yeah. Oh,
That's how simple as that.
that karma loop always does have a way of working out. So
Yep.
this was great. This could go on for hours. So much knowledge in this. So one, I just want to thank you for the time coming to join on the show. You've shared so much wisdom, and but for both sides, whether you're a transitioning veteran or a recruiter, and trying to think about how you can better utilize this group of people who have an untapped set of skills. You just need to help them translate. So hopefully it inspires some recruiters to start incorporating this in their day-to-day moving forward. So from here, the usual end wrap up. Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. You can find all the show notes in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platforms, as well as on loxo.co/podcast. Full video episode is available on YouTube as well as on our website. And if you ever have questions, send over to us at podcast@loxo.co. So Brandon, where can people find you after they listen to this conversation?
All the things, LinkedIn, Facebook, my email, Brandon at techrecruiterpro.com. Happy to always help or lend a helping hand, if you will. Yeah, I just thank you for the time, to share, and always willing to help out. So, we're all in
Perfect.
this game together, right? So,
Love it. Well, yeah, thank you. All right, everyone. Well, that's a show. That was an incredible interview with Brandon. Until next time. Bye, y'all.
thank you.